All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. And we've got a number of things we want to walk through. The RTP and Land Water Conservation Fund resources have been around for a while. And we did a study a few years ago about how much of that resources were landing in the Ohio Valley. But to start today, we're excited to have the 3 state program directors for how you attain such resources for your community. But to start today, the resources start at the federal level and flow down into the states. So we're going to start with our partners with the National Park Service, and Moses Chun is here. A little bit of a review though before we get into that. Here's our agenda for the day. Where we start with Moses, where the resources start is going to come first. We'll do a little bit of overview about what the resources are all about, and then get right into it with our state speakers from Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. So Moses, with that, I'm going to take it off share screen so we can see you and hear from the National Park Service about where the resources originate.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Moses. I am with the National Park Service, the Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program. You may be familiar with a lot of my colleagues, Russ Clark and Andrea Ireland, who've worked with you over the last several years. And it's a real pleasure to join you for this funding webinar with the leadership of the Ohio River Way. So thank you, Brewster, Francis, and Dave for inviting me. Today we're talking a little bit about LWCF, so Land Water Conservation Fund, and RTP, which and directly from the states. Annually, the U.S. Congress funds these programs and administers it for LWCF through the Park Service and for RTP through the Federal Highway Administration. I think we're looking at $900 million annually for LWCF. That was established or made more permanent through the Great American Outdoors Act. I believe that was 2020. And for the Recreational Trails Program, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, I think, put in $350 billion over 5 years. So that's a good, considerable amount of funding that is being doled out to the states. Each state receives a portion of those funds to allocate towards conservation outdoor recreation for LWCF and for the development of trails or trail facilities in RTP's case. So I just wanted to say that in order to ensure that success of Ohio River Way and that vision, I wanted to encourage you all to be strategic with how we align those goals and to leverage those local, the regional, the state resources. And you know, in the work that we do, we see that this requires a lot of creativity, a lot of leadership and collaboration. And through those collective efforts and the networks that we build, just like in webinars like these and in conversations that we can have like this, we can create significant change and improve the quality of life for all the residents to have close to home access to amazing resources like the Ohio River. So one of the great benefits of having the Ohio River Way is its potential and I believe a strong identity to land stewardship, to conservation, and offering recreation throughout the river. And I hope that by working together, we can implement that shared vision and build a sense of unity and purpose for all the stakeholders. And again, I just wanted to stress that importance of collaboration and partnership amongst a diversity of groups that we have here today, that all of our organizations can come together to create something amazing for the generations to come. So I really want to thank the representatives from each of our states, Nathaniel Simmons from Indiana, Tim Robinson from Ohio, Jessica Hill from Kentucky. Thank you for joining us. And I hope that you all benefit from these knowledge experts and to help guide us through those state processes. And getting funding for your projects. So thank you so much. There's a little bit of an overview of these funds, and we'll get into more of those details into the breakout rooms. But again, I just wanted to say thank you for having me, Francis, and I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Moses. And so it's been about 40 years since the RTP and Land Water Conservation Fund programs have been around in the United States. And we did, like I said at the top, we did a bit of a study for the Ohio Valley to see how much of those resources, as Moses indicated, they flow from the feds to the states, and then the states send them into projects and communities. Back on the previous slide, it acknowledged that some of that is done through the SCORP plan, the state outdoor recreation plans that each state has to maintain. And some of this is guided through those plans. So there's an infrastructure in place, if you will, that helps get these things into our communities. But what we noted last when we did a study on how many of these resources have landed in the Ohio Valley, and in part it has to do with who's asking for it and when. But for example, over the course of the program, 32 million for Ohio has flown into the state. And if you take a look at how much of that actually landed in the Ohio Valley, it's about 1.7 million over 40 years. Over in Indiana for the Land Water Conservation Funds, it's about 581. And these numbers were derived off of the Coalition for RTP and Land Water Conservation nationally. So we're basing this off of some statistics that have been around for some time. Some examples about projects that have been funded in the past, way back in 1982, Maysville went after a project, got 63,000. VV has successfully secured some of the funding in Switzerland County in Indiana. This skate park over in Portsmouth was also able to leverage some of these funds. But if you look at that map that's on the right, it looks a little bit like smallpox. What we would like to see, it's kind of hard to identify where the Ohio River is on that map. And what would be awesome to see for the Ohio River is all those blue dots are land water conservation funded projects over the history of the program. And it would be great to see the actual outline of the Ohio River on that map in future years. One thing to note, and I'm just going to run through a few things about some of these programs, about some of these about the RTP and land water conservation funding. It is not very often at all is if it's considered the sole source of your project. So for the most part, while very, very useful, these two funding resources are part of what is considered the capital stack for your potential improvement project. Thanks to our friends at the Great Parks of Hamilton County over in Cincinnati, these are some examples of the way in which the land water conservation funds have flowed into a project. Very useful, but they're usually not the sole source of funding in a particular project. And in fact, the administrators will probably acknowledge that they don't want to be the sole source of source of funds in a project. So before we turn it over to our program administrators, at the Ohio River Way, we've been talking a lot recently about what makes a great river town. And so we want to think about the engagement between people and the river in terms of a physical engagement and also a programmatic engagement. And what's shown here on the screen, and I don't even know what city or community that is. I hope it's not on the Ohio River, but at any rate, I'm going to pick on it for a minute. And of course, there's a river levee there that obstructs the access. But how that manifests itself is there's no engagement between the river itself, the water, and the people behind it. And so the levee, of course, plays a major role in that. But there are ways in which you can if you happen to have a levee in your area, there's ways in which you can engage and create better connection between the river and the people. Here's an example. A better way to do it would be, I think this is Mobile, Alabama on the left, is a great infrastructure project that went in. This looks like lots of physical infrastructure, lots of physical engagement. There's a festival clearly going on. The folks on the shore are clearly overlooking what's happening on the water. Oftentimes when communities think about how to engage with the river, this seems like an obvious solution. Very much down to the water, literally at the water's edge. But unfortunately, that style is very expensive. So the infrastructure, running events is expensive. The infrastructure is expensive. You don't have to go that far when you're trying to improve your community. On the right is an example of a primitive water access, which is a tenth the cost or a hundredth the cost of building concrete barrier walls. What's on the right can also provide a level of engagement that would be useful that a lot of communities along the Ohio River don't yet have. So as we turn it over to the experts from the 3 states, I just wanted to get all of us thinking about, we don't have to shoot for the moon here with awesome infrastructure on the left. If you can, great. If not, there are other alternatives to how you can engage with your community with your water that don't involve massive investment. So we're going to start now with the great state of Indiana and Nathaniel Simmons, who is the project manager, the administrator for the program in Indiana.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm Nathaniel Simmons. I'm the grants manager in the grants section of the Community Grants and Trails section within Indiana State Parks within the Indiana DNR. So some of the grants programs that we work on have obviously already been mentioned: the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the Indiana Trails Program, which is basically our state version of RTP. And we've also worked some on the Next Level Trails program, which is another state-specific program. So to start with the Indiana Trails program, that is basically Indiana's successor to the Recreational Trails program. It's programmatically very similar. The big difference is that it's 100% administered through the Indiana DNR and not the federal government. But it's similar in that it is a program with 80% grant and a minimum of 20% local match. And the grant amounts that we offer for successful applicants are between $100,000 for a $125,000 total project and $400,000 grants for a total of a $500,000 project. It's a very competitive program that you have to apply for. We are usually able to give out about 1.5 million every other year. So we unfortunately not able to fund everyone who applies for that. So again, it is competitive. And we do that every other year. Our next applications will be due in 2025. We just closed the window for applications for this year. And applicants for ITP can be units of local government or non-for-profits if they're able to document that their core mission is specifically related to trails and outdoor recreation. This can fund paved trails like the one you see here, or natural surface trails. And we require ADA compliance for those paved trails. And it can also sometimes include some land acquisition. But if there's a lot of land acquisition, we usually steer potential applicants towards other programs that the state has. So some of the measurables that can make projects competitive if they apply, obviously the more mileage, the better. If it's part of extending what we call the visionary trail system shown on that map, I can share a more detailed version to anyone who's interested. But those are basically corridors where the state wants to prioritize trail development as identified in our state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. We also have a map not shown of counties that do not have many trail miles per capita. Again, I can share that to anyone who's interested. Any trail like the one pictured that has connections to nature, we encourage that as well. We also administer the Next Level Trails program. The DNR does, and that has so far given $150 million to trails throughout the state. And there may be additional rounds. The funding has been recommended by the governor, but that is currently going through the legislative process. So stay tuned is what we're telling everyone right now. And so the Indiana's Land and Water Conservation Fund, we give grants between $50,000 and $700,000. Some of it goes directly to state parks. The remainder, which is most of it, goes to local governments who can apply for it for various amenities in their parks and for land acquisition. So eligible applicants, they have to be municipal or county governments to have park boards incorporated under certain legislation and have approved 5-year parks and recreation master plans that they send to us and have been approved by our main planning person, Greg Bifus. And again, development improvement of parks that is eligible, and we also help communities acquire land for new parks and expanded parks. And we accept applications every year on June 1st. And we encourage everyone to contact us before they apply. The criteria that make applications more competitive are if they acquire more land, if they preserve significant natural resources, any additional recreational development or new amenities, anything that's documented strongly in local planning documents or comprehensive or parks plans. And there are also additional points for first-time recipients and first-time applicants. And feel free to contact us. We have program-specific emails, lwcf@dnr.in.gov if you have LWCF questions, ITP for ITP questions, or you can contact us directly, myself, as well as the 2 grant coordinators, Erica and Carmen. And if you have questions specific to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan approval process to be eligible for LWCF, feel free to contact Greg Bifus.
All right, thank you very much for that. We'll have an opportunity at the end, folks, to break out into breakout rooms to get some direct technical assistance. So but let's skip to the Commonwealth of Kentucky with Jessica Hill.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jessica Hill, and I am the Federal Program Specialist at the Department for Local Government. And I oversee the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Recreational Trails Program for the state of Kentucky. Next slide. During my talk, I'm pretty much going to go over our state's LWCF and RTP program, our funding, some matching requirements, some examples, the timeline, and the scoring criteria. So basically, as you probably already know, the LWCF provides funding for the construction and renovation of public outdoor recreation facilities and the acquisition of land for future development. It is administered through the National Park Service, and the LWCF grant is provided to the states, and then we distribute them to local units of government. So only city or county governments can apply for our grant. Our funding ranges from $25,000 to $250,000 with a 1-for-1 match, or up to 50% of total project cost. But you can match with general funds, city or county labor, donated labor, if you just cannot use other federal funding. For 2022, we received $3.9 million to disperse in the state. For 2021, we received $4.3 million. So we roughly get $4 million a year to fund local projects. So in our timeline, it usually takes 1.5 years by the time you submit your application to the state that you can actually start construction. So our state application window is January 1st through May 31st. During the summer, I will review all of our applications and score them based on our scoring criteria. In October, we hold an advisory committee, which is comprised of 15 members. During this meeting, all applicants are invited to present their project to the committee. And then at the end, committee submits funding recommendations to the governor. And then our governor makes his final selections in January. You receive preliminary approval letter. And then at that time, I will work with you to develop an LWCF application to submit to the NPS. So this is how we score our applications and how you can know if you have a strong project. You get points based on how you administered previous LWCF grants, whether your site is centrally located. If at least 50% of the grants is primary recreation, so those are your playgrounds, your court sports, your ball fields, support facilities, or your lighting, parking, access roads, bathrooms. So most of your grant app request goes towards support facilities. You will not receive those points. Whether or not you can maintain the project once completed. So if you have a parks board or a parks staff, you will receive more points. Whether or not you have an open LWCF project. Kentucky does allow you to apply as many times as you want, but you can only have one active project at a time. whether or not your project improves outdoor recreation for persons with disabilities, older citizens, the economically disadvantaged, or special population groups, and whether or not you align with our SCORP, which runs to 2025. And you can find a copy on our website under the LWCF tab. So just a couple quick examples of projects we have funded. We've funded a lot of rubber poured in place surfacing at playgrounds, which is an easy way to make your playground handicap accessible. We've been funding, you can do the next slide. A lot of fishing piers or boat docks, a lot of canoe access points, which would be something to think about along the Ohio River. We do fund those. And then we also fund a lot of picnic shelters, stages, amphitheaters. I funded a project that built an amphitheater along the river to help make it more of a riverfront. So that's another option. The RTP provides funding for the development and maintenance of trails, trailside, or trailhead facilities for both the motorized and non-motorized trails. We get our funding from the Federal Highway Administration. Our funding is available up to $250,000 with an 80-20 match. And we receive about $1.4 billion every year. That hardly changes. However, we are required to set aside 30% of that for motorized trails only. So the RTP is a little quicker than the LWCF. So it takes about a year from the time you submit your application to the state for when you can start construction. Similar to the LWCF, our application window is in September, where the notification letters go out in January, and you can submit it to the FHWA for funding. You just have to submit reimbursement requests once your project is approved every 6 months. And the applications that score well and that get funded are those that benefit a long length of trail or improves it, whether or not it's a multi-use trail or a number of recreational trail opportunities, whether it provides outdoor recreation for persons with disabilities and older citizens and economic disadvantage, whether or not your city or county has a local or regional plan that talks about trail development. You get bonus points if you do have a trail plan in place, whether or not your trail connects with other trails or greenways. Next slide. If you are a trail town, you get some bonus points. Does your project include signage or brochures? And then also if you have an open RTP project, you can still apply for multiple RTPs, but just one open project at a time. And there's a couple quick examples here. The city of Owensboro lined their nature trail and created some rest stops and stretching stations. We have funded, next slide please, a lot of pedestrian bridge crossings over rivers and creeks. And then we've also done a lot of paving to pave walking trails and create new greenways. And just a couple quick resources. This links to our website, to the manual, to the FHWA website that talks about the Recreational Trails Program, and to our Transportation Cabinet's LPA guide if you would like to have more information on how to construct trails or roadway projects. And that's the end of mine.
All right, thank you very much, Jessica. And important to note, Trail Town is a designation that's a construct of the state of Kentucky. They have their own Trail Town program, so some things are ubiquitous across state lines and some things are not. So we think all of our Ohio River towns are trail towns, but there's a specific designation over there in Kentucky. So last up is the great state of Ohio, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim Robinson.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Tim Robinson. I'm the Recreation Services Administrator here at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Office of Real Estate. Also on the webinar with me today is DeJuan Hammonds, who administers our Recreational Trails Program, as well as a state-funded program called the Clean Ohio Trails Fund, and we'll get into our presentation here. There are going to be some overlapping pieces of information, so we might be able to go through this quickly. So Clean Ohio Trails Fund is sort of a partner program that we offer from state funding along with the Recreational Trails Program. And then we have a state-funded parks facility improvement program called NatureWorks that is a partner program to the Land and Water Conservation Fund program here in Ohio. And all of these programs, we do offer annual funding opportunities through the state. Click to the next slide. So we'll start with the Clean Ohio Trails Fund. So the Clean Ohio Trail Fund's priorities are really funding the long distance trail corridors throughout the state, primarily for new development. And we do fund some acquisition, but we would primarily fund acquisition only for the specific trail corridor that you are looking to develop. It does prioritize the items that are mentioned here. So purchase of old rail lines, for example, linking population centers, linking to a regional trail system or a statewide trail system, or preserving natural corridors. Clean Ohio Trails Fund does not currently fund maintenance projects or other sort of support facilities like trailheads or parking lots. It's really primarily supportive of just new trail development and acquisition of new trail corridors. And annually, we have about $6.25 million to award out. Applications for Clean Ohio Trails Fund and RTP are taken together. Our next application deadline is in April of 2023. So here are some points about this. So the trailhead facilities, I guess I would correct, is only if it's a very small portion of the project. So it could be a standalone, project to request a like a restroom, shelter house, something like that. And then engineering and design can be part of a trail project. And there is a look back period when those costs could be eligible. And we also partner these grants a lot of times with the Transportation Alternatives Program, with funding coming through our Department of Transportation. So those programs can work together to fund a good portion of an overall project. Next slide. So Clean Ohio Trails Fund is open to local government agencies, park and joint recreation districts, conservancy districts, nonprofit organizations, but we do not award state or federal agencies with these grants. Next slide. The maximum project award is $500,000 and the time to complete the project is 15 months. So we do mirror the recreational trails process in some ways, where we do complete a categorical exclusion or environmental review prior to moving into contract. So once a project has been approved and moves into contract, you have a period of 15 months to complete the project. And there is a requirement that the property that's developed must remain open for trail use and for public access for a minimum of 15 years. So you would need to provide documentation of ownership of the property of the trail corridor when you apply. And there is a minimum match requirement of 25% of the total project cost. And there is some additional benefit in waiting if you do provide additional match amount beyond that 25%. The recreational trail program in Ohio receives about $1.6 million annually. And as Jessica mentioned, 30% of that must go towards motorized trails. So here's some examples of eligible projects. We are able to fund maintenance, restoration, and equipment have been eligible, project scopes. We can also fund supportive trailhead facilities. So if you're, developing a restroom or a shelter house, a water, water fountain or water station that's directly supportive of the trail and primarily supporting the trail, those aspects of a project would be eligible. Eligible applicants include local agencies of government, as well as state and federal agencies and nonprofit organizations. There is a 20% required match, and the maximum award is $150,000. And similarly, the time to complete the project is 15 months, and that's once we've entered into a contract. So once your environmental process again is approved by the Federal Highway Administration, we can execute a contract, and you have 15 months to complete the project. And again, a portion of that annual allocation goes to support motorized trail development and improvements as well. Next slide. So NatureWorks is a state-funded program that funds park development and acquisitions, so very similar to LWCF. There is a similar requirement on the property that would have to remain open for outdoor recreational use for 5 years at least. Engineering and design can be a portion of the project. And these grants are eligible for local subdivisions of government, School districts and nonprofit organizations are not eligible for these grants. And again, you'd have to just document that you own the property that's to be improved. We are limited here typically with improvements within a park facility. The statute requires that the primary use of the property that's being improved with NatureWorks funding, the primary use is for outdoor recreation. So we typically are not able to fund, portions of projects that are in rights of way, road rights of way, things like that. So you want to stick within a park facility. There's a 25% match requirement, and the statute for the program requires that 20% of that 25% must be non-state or non-federal sources. So there must be some local contribution, whether that's through a general fund, whether it's through private donations, foundation grants. You can use your own, staff time if your staff is, installing a project, or you have equipment that can be tracked and documented as well. It can be used to match your federal land and water conservation funds. So you could, in theory, receive both grants for a single project. And typically we take applications June 1st each year, and we're getting contracts out usually in December. And then you have a 2-year project period. So you usually have, for example, this year, projects that were applied for in 2022 have an effective date of the executed contract, which most of those were January of 23, and the project period expires December 31st of 2024. So about a 2-year project period. So for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, some of the statistics are obviously going to remain consistent as far as the history of the program. You can go on to the next slide, please. So again, here we fund acquisition of new property that would be intended for outdoor recreation and park use, development and rehabilitation, and then as well, engineering and design can be a portion of the project. And these projects, again, are eligible for local subdivisions of government. Nonprofit organizations, school districts are not eligible in Ohio. There's a 50% match requirement. Our minimum grant request is $50,000 and our maximum award is $500,000. And we typically take applications now annually in November, mid-November. We used to be on a alternating year cycle where in 1 year we would fund only state projects and DNR divisions, like our divisions of Parks and Watercraft, Division of Wildlife. But with the increase in funding and the funding guarantees through the Great American Outdoors Act, we have transitioned now to offering annual grants to local government agencies. We're wrapping up our process from applications taken in November of 22 and should be making award announcements soon there. And then we'll work to have our application updated online this summer for the next opportunity in November. And the properties that are improved or acquired with LWCF grants must remain open in perpetuity for outdoor recreation. You can go on to the next slide. A couple example slides of prior grant projects. So we're seeing right now a lot of, redevelopment or renovation projects with playgrounds, shelter houses, those types of facilities. We're also seeing a lot of applications for things like splash pads and updated facilities that might be replacing old swimming pools that may be either closed or, in drastic need of repair that are just too expensive for communities to manage. You can go on to the next slide, Francis. Here is our contact information. So Dee Burleson on my staff is not on this call today, but she is our new Land and Water Conservation Fund and NatureWorks program manager. So Dee is available for questions as well. Dewan is on the call and he's always available for information. And then I would just add one additional note is that our office also processes a lot of funding that I think a lot of the attendees of this call from Ohio have through the state capital budget. So legislative appropriations that are designated to local park recreation and conservation projects. Those funds flow through our Office of Real Estate here at ODNR. So we've had the opportunity to work, I think, with a lot of folks along the Riverway that is sort of another opportunity that are legislative appropriations that you can secure from the state legislators. But we end up being involved in those projects and processing those out, and those funds can be used to match land and water conservation grant funds as well.
All right, thank you very much, Tim. So we have a lot of opportunity here with the available funding flowing through the channels from the federal government via the SCORP plans and other things into the Ohio, into the states. And we would love to encourage that to land here in the Ohio Valley. What we're going to do now is break out into rooms to get some technical assistance specifically by state. So when you registered, one of the reasons why we asked you for your address was so we could put you in your room. But before we do that, I very much want to say thank you to our speakers. We are going to do a what we call a water cooler session at the top of the hour, or once we're done here in the breakout room. So programming is not done yet, but if we lose you during the breakout session, if you happen to need, keep us posted on what you're going to pursue with your land water conservation funds or RTP funds for your community. If you need support, we'll have our the speakers' contact information will be available with our we'll send a PDF of this presentation out as soon as we can have it available. We'll post it on the website. The best place to go is directly to those folks. However, if you have questions, we'll be happy to help as much as we can. What we can help with is some creative thinking about ways in which you can, what you should be applying for your community. To my point earlier about if you don't have the resources to pursue a $20 million riverfront redevelopment project, that's okay. You can still engage with the river in a way that is cheap and cheerful and not requiring a boatload of money. We can also, at the Ohio Riverway, do letters of support for you for your project. I don't know if that is a requirement necessarily for the RTP or land water conservation funds, but with anything you're doing on your waterfront, we would love to see it happen, and we will do as best we can to support it from a regional perspective. So we would love to see the investment upped on the Ohio River. And once again, we're going to have our post-mortem or our water cooler session later. But with that, we're going to break out to do some technical assistance specifically with our resources from Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And I'm going to rely on Forrest to do the breakout.
Yes, so you should see where you can choose which room to go to, whether you want to go to Kentucky, Indiana, or Ohio.
And as a speaker, if you're a co-host, you probably see all the rooms. So you're either going to, just a reminder, Jessica Hill, Kentucky, Tim Robinson, Indiana, Ohio, and Nathaniel is with Indiana.
Francis, what time do you think we should shut the breakout rooms down?
Well, good morning or good afternoon. That's just, we have a crew here from Kentucky. And so, Jessica, is there anything you wish to tell just us Kentuckians? Or maybe, that could be the start. And then there is a process on here. We can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask your question. But any initial comments, Jessica?
No, I guess we'll see how these questions go. I'm much more going with the flow, and depending on what the questions we have, I could definitely elaborate on a lot more things for our state.
Are there any questions? Mayor Cleaves, we'll put you on the spot. Have you taken advantage of land and water conservation grants or other funding from the state for your outdoor recreation? And do you have any questions or suggestions for Jessica?
I have not got any of the land water conservation grants. I've gotten a lot of grants, but none of those. And what I'm looking for right now is a grant to fund a kayak launch. So I think this works for that. Is that true?
Yeah, you could apply for both depending on who owns the property. If it's like a nice piece of, so as I think Indiana or Ohio mentioned, the LWCF does require a deed restriction to ensure that the park remains open in perpetuity. So if you're doing just a kayak launch, that might be better for the RTP program if it's on like a big piece of land, because the NPS will require that entire parcel that the kayak launch is located on to be deed restricted in perpetuity. So that's also something to consider when you're looking at that kind of like a dock or a fishing pier or a kayak launch, what the parcel looks like.
Well, yes, we own it. It's at our Bellevue Beach Park, so it's right on the Ohio River and it's all city-owned property. And we wanted to put it right on the one edge of it.
Oh, yeah, so there's already a park, then you can definitely go for LWCF. I guess I did think of something to mention is that the LWCF has a lot more funding than the RTP program. So we receive, like I said, we receive about $4.4 million a year to disperse, and we get about $5 million in requests. So that's pretty good odds that you can receive LWCF funding. On the other hand, for the RTP, after you take away the money we have to set aside for motorized trails, we only have about $900,000 to disperse, but we still get $3 to $4 million in requests. So the RTP is definitely a lot more competitive. So if you can make a project work with the LWCF and you don't mind the deed restriction requirement, you have a lot better chance of receiving LWCF funding.
All right, thank you.
Jessica, does motorized trails include motorized e-bikes?
No, that actually was a big deal a couple years ago, and I decided that e-bikes is not considered motorized.
Mr. Young.
Well,
you
that's
have-
unless it's ADA or, handicap. You have to, don't you?
Not for the RTP, but for the LWCF, you do have to make, you do have to try to make it handicap accessible. If there's some reasons like you can't, then you can submit like justification and we can submit to the NPS. But not for the RTP.
Mark, why don't you introduce yourself? He is with a fascinating organization that provides professional development for professionals.
I'm in Mark Young, I'm in Louisville, and I registered for this through the Falls of the Ohio Foundation, which supports Falls of the Ohio State Park and the whole Falls of the Ohio region. But I also do consulting with Parks Forever Consulting and advocacy. So done a lot of work in terms of lobbying for LWCF and RTP and many other programs, federal programs primarily, and state as well. But so yeah, that I was interested in the scoring for the for say canoe, kayak launches, trailhead facilities for water trails. None were really mentioned in anybody's a little presentation, but just wondered if they score high. How does that usually, work out for those types of facilities?
Well, I've only received, I think, 2. I've been in this position for going on 3 years, so I don't have a lot of experience with the previous projects, but in my 3 application cycles, I think we haven't gotten many kayak launches. I did fund one was completed, and that they did multiple. So that's also, so they had a better chance of scoring well because they had a lot more trail length because they offered access to miles of trails. If it was just one kayak launch, it didn't score that well because it's only one single use. It doesn't fund like with the other, like it's only a single use. The amount of trail that was developed wasn't that much and that kind of stuff. But if you could able to do like 3 or 4, then I think it scored well. I'm trying to figure back, think back. Applications from 2 years ago. So I've had multiple projects and now it got recycled.
One of the interesting things I saw, Jessica, was that Kentucky Trail Town gets additional points.
Yes.
And from my understanding, there are no Kentucky Trail Towns on the Ohio River. And so maybe that's one of the initiatives, is to really think through that process of applying. And that's really a tourism office initiative not Department of Local Government. Isn't that accurate, Jessica?
Yes. Well, I think to do a trail town is the Kentucky Department of Tourism, which is not through DLG, it's through the Arts and Heritage Cabinet.
And so maybe that's and there's, I see Christy Knoll on here, and she's up there in Boone County, sort of thinking about a variety of projects. And so, Christy, we're going to put you on the spot. What are you working on, and how can Jessica help you?
So my question, Jessica, is when its presentation said that no federal funding can be used for your match with the LWCF, I think I heard that correctly. But can other federal money be in the pot? So my framework right now is land acquisition, which is so hard to find funding for projects on the Ohio. We have a couple of targeted properties that we're looking at acquiring and then turning into parks. And I'm wondering if you can commingle federal funds if that's not part of your match.
No, if you're talking about purchasing property, then it's still part of the pot. So they still will deny it because it's assisting. They don't want you to use federal funds with federal funds.
Okay, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife, when they do bat mitigation, it flows through them, but it's not originally federal money. Do you know if that is excluded from that pot?
I don't. I would say you'll be okay because it's part of like environmental. Because I know with like RTP, if you like remove trees, you have to pay into it. So it's part of the environmental process.
Right.
Yeah, so I feel like that would be fine. But if you ever get around to applying for submitting an application, definitely let me know and I can check for you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and hopefully we'll have something coming up that I can reach out.
Yeah.
I'm Sandra Wilson. I am not on the Ohio River, but we do a lot of trails. But I just wanted to give you all a little inside point of view from years ago, not that many years ago, when I was on the board, the Land and Water Conservation Board that reviewed and chose the people to recommend to be approved. Jessica wasn't there. It was a different governor and all that governors ago, but we were encouraged to spread the money around to different areas, try to get one in every area development district. And we sometimes were discouraged because we tried to follow the scoring rules and all that. And then when the final notifications of approval came through, they weren't close to what we'd recommended. So what I'm saying is no bad blood at all, except that in addition to having a great application and a great project, you work your politics. It's the way it is. Jessica can't say that, but you know, and that's the way it was when I was on there, and I was on there for several years. So, and that's everything, you know, that's not unusual. That's everything you apply for, you cover all your bases.
Thank you, Sandra. I think that historical perspective and, you know, is a dose of reality sometimes. Probably a good, strong application is still a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you just got to cover all your bases. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Any other pieces? You know, I see Jody Robinson is on the call here, and she's a bicycle enthusiast. And so, Jody, can I call on you to see what you might see the support from Land and Water Conservation for bicycle paths or bicycle infrastructure? Is that possible?
Sure. I think that there's all sorts of possibilities that bring us to engage with the river. There are already a lot of paths. Some of them are not hard enough surfaces for bicycles, but it wouldn't be much of an upgrade. And certainly here in Northern Kentucky, we work with South Bank Partners who are trying to create that multi-use path. But the more we can get people out on bikes for recreation and also transportation, the better. It's just a great way to experience our communities in the river.
Jessica, does that help as a bike path that would be both for recreation as well as commuting? Is that, does that give more points?
That would for the RTP, yeah, because a bike path could be miles of recreational trail. And you can also say that people can jog on the path, they can roller skate, for skateboarding is a trail use, according to our point criteria. So you can say, even though, you know, you want it mostly for bikes, it could still be multi-use and score well on the scoring criteria. And something I did forget to mention with the RTP is that since we don't have a lot of funding to disperse, our current board loves to see projects that are in phases. So instead of always coming in and demanding the 250,000 every single time, if you can show that you're willing to work with the committee and do it in phases, like phase 1, we're going to pay 1 mile and all that kind of stuff, then they actually, even though it might not score well because you're not developing a lot of trail link, they like it because you can get more bang for your buck and they know that you're taking the grant into consideration and you have a long-term plan.
Hey, this is Lauren O'Brien from the city of Newport. We actually have, there's an RPT for the Purple People Bridge. I think it's 125,000. And
Yes.
then we have 250,000 for Festival Park for playground equipment. So what Jody was saying, there is that bike path right there. That's part of the bike plan. Because people ride their bikes a lot across the Purple People Bridge and they can commute and stuff. So we've been very appreciative of like working with you and everything to kind of get that off. We're kind of moving slow due to the job-ish. So that's kind of been on me, but we're really appreciative of everything you guys have been doing to help us keep that moving and get that money. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. The next application period is coming up in a couple months. So if you want to be included in the next round, hit me up.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any, we probably have a time for one more comment or question? No, well, if people are more than welcome to interrupt. This is just a observation, Jessica, and maybe other folks, especially Sandra, as you've been involved so long. And listening to Indiana and to Ohio, it seems like they have a variety of funding sources that are more substantial and robust than we have here in Kentucky. Now, it might just be a flawed observation from me, but do you think that's the case, Jessica? Or if anybody else wants to comment on, you know, if it's good for the people across the river, it's good for us.
Yeah, they have a lot more local state funding. I know we don't have much. Of course, don't be giving me more work. I'm more than happy with just the LWCF and the RTP. But I did realize that they have a lot more state funded grants, whereas I just deal with federal grants. I'll have to go see if we have any. I know we have the transportation alternatives, so if you want to build like sidewalks, but that's through the transportation cabinet. And I feel like ours in our state, it's a lot more dispersed between all the different types of cabinets, and we just don't really have like one, like there they have a parks and all of the park funding goes through them, which is nice. But like I said, I'm fine with my two. It's just me over here, so.
I was at a meeting this week with the Land Trust Kentucky community, and they were talking about how Kentucky doesn't have a very good, we don't have a good state match for federal funds. Can you elaborate on what they meant by that? It was something I didn't really understand. Do you know what that would have meant?
A good state match for federal funds? I do not.
Okay, me neither. I'll look into it.
Maybe she means, maybe are you referring to the match, the 50% match for LWCF? The local
I'm not
match?
sure. I'm not sure. Like
That's what it
Kentucky
sounds like.
was behind on where
And
we
a lot
should
of
be.
local, you know, departments, agencies are having trouble coming up with that capital funding through their capital projects for a match or capital budget to, you know, that 50%. So I don't know if any adjustments, I know that it's still 50%, but I don't know if there was any proposals to kind of make that more like the RTP, which is 80% federal, 20% local.
Actually, There was talk on because the 50% match is federally mandated. There's nothing we can do about that. There was some talk, I think a couple years ago, there is a board or the LWCF. It's some kind of organization for all of the state LWCF programs, and they've been really lobbying the NPS and Department of Interior to drop it to a 20% match.
I hate to do this, but we're getting called back in 2 seconds, so.
Okay.
Welcome back.
All right, thanks, everybody. We were just talking about cultural trails and creative ways to pursue the RTP funding potentially, or land water conservation trail funding, I should say, over in the state. I was in Indiana. I don't know where everyone else went, but that's where I went for a few minutes, virtually. So once again, would love to thank everybody for coming today, but specifically our speakers, Moses, Jessica, Nathaniel, Tim. We would love to do this every year. Like I said, the map that we showed earlier of the sort of the blotchy, it looks inconsistent, but there's methods to the madness in terms of where these funding resources land. Would love to see that bright line defined more about where the Ohio River is. And want to thank everyone for attending today. We're going to stick around. We're closing for now and officially closing. If anyone wants to stick around and do what we call our water cooler session, please stay with us and we'll talk through anything that you might have learned, and we'd kind of do a post-mortem. But thanks every much for joining on our first ever trail funding webinar for the region. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thank you, Francis. So stick with us if you like, folks. It's a good way to meet folks you don't necessarily know already and share some best practices.
Well, one piece in our Kentucky group, which was a very robust discussion and had some fascinating sort of over the time. We had one woman who was on the Land and Water Conservation Board for many years and sort of talked about the need for community and political support. We also had a big discussion around what's qualifying for the local matches and sort of zeroing in on that. We ended up with an observation that it appears that Indiana and Ohio have a bit more funds than Kentucky does, and maybe it's because of locally designated funds from the state. And so that was just one observation. So if anybody, any grant manager in Ohio who wants to allow sort of that southern shore of Kentucky to get developed, I think it's a good thing. It's called preserving the viewshed. When you go to New Richmond, it's so important. You're in a historic, beautiful area, and if you can preserve the viewshed over on the Kentucky side, it'll make downtown New Richmond so much more permanent and protected. So that was just one observation. I don't know what.
So, Tim, do we know? I think it's based on population, right? That's why Kentucky gets fewer resources from the jump to distribute, right?
Yeah, for the Land and Water Conservation Fund program, yes, it's a formula-based, I believe, distribution, and I think population is a key characteristic of their formula. I think there's some urban population requirements as well, which might drive Ohio up a little bit more, maybe in comparison to Kentucky also.
Ohio takes their state funding as well. So, that's what we're missing really in part is
I see
our state funds. And so the combination of the two really is a big bang for the buck.
Yeah, the state funds have been the Clean Ohio Trails Fund, I would say, has remained pretty consistent. We typically get $12.5 million in our biennium capital budget, so we bring that up 6.25 annually, and that's been pretty consistent. And then the RTP funding, we were just talking in the Ohio room how that's basically been at the same levels for over a decade. So there's not been really any increase in recent history on that side of the federal program. And then NatureWorks is kind of a biennium, it's a bit of a formula base as well on how much money gets distributed to the NatureWorks program. And then once that money is awarded, then there's a formula that's based on population, and each county in Ohio gets their own allocation that they can apply to each year.
So at each level, we've got the funding flowing from the federal, what all starts with us. We send it to the federal government, it comes back. Some of the resources are part of our own tax base. Some of them are not, so based off of non-tax dollars. But at each stage, there's a filter that filter. So talk about the importance of, sorry, I'm still on business mode. Talk about the importance of the SCORP plans per state and how that plays out to the filtering of the resources into the communities. And I'm going to throw this one to Jessica.
Well, the SCORP sets the goal for what we want to fund for the next 5 years and what kind of projects we want to see. I would like to say the SCORP is very important, but also we've received a lot of money where we can fund most of our projects, even the things that barely meets the SCORP. So it's maybe once we get more, because we used to only receive like 1.3 million in LWCF funding, but now thanks to the passage of the Great American Outdoor Act, we jumped it from 1.3 up to $4 million. So it was just, we're rolling in cash now. So I think before the SCORP was a lot more helpful because it showed people what we were going to fund this 5 years. This is what we want to see our state do. But now it's just like, okay, I can kind of make you fit the SCORP. We just want to get rid of this money. Here you go. Go build something. And which I guess, so maybe I need more, have people send me more applications and then we can get more into the weeds of the SCORP.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, just quickly, on the LWCF, I didn't hear anybody mention the relatively new program called the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, where out of LWCF, they've carved out, what is it, maybe 50 million, something like that. I can't remember, but this is for urban centers, cities, and for outdoor spaces. I can find some information out about it, but it's been was enacted maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but very popular. It's for cities 50,000 or larger. So it's got a lot of the same criteria that the other part of the LWCF program has, but it's geared to the urban centers.
You put a link in the chat for that.
I can, yes.
Yeah, and they dropped it to 30,000 this application cycle. They're constantly tweaking the requirements of it, but unfortunately, no city in Northern Kentucky qualifies. So most of it is like Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, and I think Henderson is the only things right now that qualifies for the ORLAP, how you pronounce it.
Yeah, there's also some income related information. It is supposed to be geared towards lower income communities. So yeah, it does have to be larger communities, which I don't think as of right now. Well, no, I take that back. I think some of the New Albany, Jeffersonville, Clarksville might be large enough to be eligible in terms of population. But yeah, there's also some fairly complicated documentation that has to go in to the application in terms of documenting the income levels and existing proximity to parks where the proposed project is.
Yeah, I would just jump in and add in Ohio. Sorry, I was just going to say they did drop the population threshold from 50,000 to 30,000. I think that it's almost tripled the number of communities in Ohio that are eligible, and those are posted on the ODNR website. So we have a grant opportunities page on our website that I can put a link into. If you wanted to just get a quick look of what communities are eligible. And I would just add that one additional step with the ORLP program is that the state serves as the clearinghouse, but then we would submit applications that we would think are viable to a nationwide competition that the Park Service reviews and they make the funding decisions for. So the state sort of does the first level review and then would submit applications to the Park Service, and then ultimately the Park Service is responsible for selecting the projects that get funded through the program. And I think from Ohio, the challenges that we've presented are just the rules and the guidelines of the program have not been consistent. They've been a little fluid annually, and so it's hard to really promote and market the program because there are, as Nathaniel said, very strict requirements, but when the rules change every year, it's hard to really do a lot of planning in advance to have communities set up to be able to be ready to apply for that opportunity. But that's certainly something we're looking to prioritize here in Ohio moving forward.
That's Mark, thanks for speaking up on that one. Kelly, did you